Gaming seems to change in some way every generation. Every generation had new innovative ideas for the type of game or the way the game is meant to be played. Although most of the time it was just better graphics, but other times it was a new way to game. In some cases for the good, and in some cases, yeah. Gaming actually managed to bring in all types of people, from little kids to the elderly. Hell, even people that used to make fun of gamers back in the day and call them nerds in some cases are actually now even more of a nerd than the people they used to make fun of. Ironically enough, by their own definition. But I wonder if too much innovation is a bad thing. Yeah, it's true that innovation is the main reason why the gaming community that was once consisted of what people call nerds now consists of, well, every damn body. Yet, somehow I can't shake this feeling that too much innovation might end up having the exact opposite effect that it's had so far. Especially when every new innovative idea isn't necessarily liked by every gamer, and in some cases, even runs them off. This one's gonna be pretty difficult to explain. But what the hell, let's see what happens. Over the course of our lives, things that we've all liked at some point went through a change. In some cases, the change made us like it more, and in other cases, the change had the exact opposite effect and pushed us away. And what pushed us away is that we felt that the change completely ruined something that we once considered exceptional. As of right now, so far we've had 7 generations of gaming, sadly 2 of which I never experienced as they were before my time. But each one of these generations seem to offer something different in the world of gaming, some of which seem to be a good thing, and some that seem to make people say, what in the hell were they thinking? Every generation, we're always looking for new innovative ways to game, and some developers are always trying to find new innovative ways to make that happen, while other developers may find it safer to stick with what they know people already like. However, can the same thing we want coincidentally end up being the same reason why we stop liking it? What happens when the method of new idea every generation and the method of same idea every generation no longer work? Can the innovation we're looking for in gaming end up pushing us away from it altogether, while the repetitiveness of gaming also do the same thing? People will always look for the next new thing, yeah, but what happens when the new thing we're always looking for has a negative effect? To truly get you guys to understand this first, we all have to be able to look at it from the same perspective, and there's only one way I know how to make that happen. Let's change the main subject here, but keep the same topic. Think about a time when one of your parents or grandparents told you how whatever it was you happen to like at the moment was actually a lot better when they were kids. Remember how annoying it was when you always heard, you know, back in our days what we had was a lot better. It, of course, being whatever you happen to like that they didn't. It almost felt like no matter what you liked, they would always believe that what they had was better and would always find some little thing to complain about. It was clear that what made them like what they had more than what you had must have had something to do with nostalgia. And sometimes nostalgia does make us look at things in an unfair perspective, but other times nostalgia can also teach us a very important lesson. Think about how something you used to like suddenly became of no interest to you. Think about your favorite show or cartoon as a kid. Then think about how you stopped watching those shows or cartoons of the same genre and ask yourself this question. Did you stop watching it because you felt that you were too old to watch it? Or did you stop watching it because what you liked stopped being shown and something different came on of the same genre but was changed in a way that you couldn't really enjoy it the same way? Or maybe they did continue to show what you liked, but they changed it and from your perspective ended up ruining something that used to be good. Think about all the shows that they have on television now. Then think about the shows they had back when you were younger than you are now. I'm sure to most of us the new shows that are out now are funny, but not for the reason they're supposed to be, but because when compared to what we grew up with, in most cases you're not laughing at it because you find it funny or entertaining, you're laughing at it because you can't understand how anyone else could find it funny or entertaining and how it even manages to stay on the air. Who'd have thunk it? In a way, I don't think we always grow out of something. I think we simply lose interest in it due to the changes made to it, to the point that it ends up giving off the opposite effect that it did before, which in turn makes it harder for us to really appreciate it for what it is, as instead of seeing it as something new and refreshing, we see it as something that ruined what used to be good. As a kid, one of my favorite things to watch on television was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I watched this cartoon all the time, and I was obsessed with the arcade game and wasted many a quarter, or token depending on which arcade you played it at. A few weeks ago I came across some of the older episodes, the same episodes that I remember watching as a kid. I actually watched a whole episode but didn't expect to because I figured I wouldn't really enjoy it the same way. This made me wonder if it was my nostalgia that was allowing me to enjoy this show, or was it because in a way I never really stopped liking it but instead turned my interest elsewhere when they started to change the series and eventually stopped showing it altogether. Yeah, they tried to remake it for the newer generation, but after watching it for about 30 seconds, there was no way I could stand it. I thought it was because I outgrew this kind of stuff, but I think it was more because of the change made to it. How many of you can go back and watch all of the shows you did as a kid and still actually enjoy it, but when you watch the newer stuff, wonder how anyone could like it? Yeah, in some cases you had to make exceptions. I mean, things like Sesame Street served no purpose for you even as a kid after you learned to count and say your ABCs. But I'm willing to bet that all of the other things you enjoyed watching back then, chances are you'd probably enjoy watching now. And despite it being made for us as kids, it's that kid side of you that's still able to enjoy it. And when you think about it in this way, it starts to make more sense why the older people would always tell us what they had back in their day was better, and why they had such a hard time giving what we liked a chance. Now let's apply that same concept to gaming. If I were to say I believe gaming were a lot more fun during the third, fourth, and fifth gaming generations, those of you who experienced those generations would probably know exactly what I'm talking about and why I said it, while those of you that may not have started gaming until the sixth or seventh generations would think, oh, that's just his nostalgia talking. But how many of you actually share the same opinion I do about gaming being more fun back then? If you were asked what made gaming more fun back then, what would be your answer? For me, that question's not as easy to answer as I thought it'd be at first. A lot of games this generation just don't grab my attention like they used to, and as some of you know, one of those main types of games are first-person shooters. But what's so strange about that is that one of my favorite games to play in the past, and ironically the reason why I wanted a PlayStation in the first place, was Doom. I wanted it for the PlayStation because A, there was no way in hell my parents were going to buy me a PC, and B, Doom on the Super Nintendo was just god-fucking awful. Why was it that I could play a game like Doom but not be able to stand a game like Call of Duty? You might be asking, why would I even make that comparison? Well, I'll tell you. A lot of people say that Call of Duty is the exact same game remade. Hell, I know I say it. But you know what's strange? In a way, so is Doom, Doom 2, and Final Doom. Hell, the only difference I remember was the introduction of the double-barrel shotgun, Pain Elemental, and Revenants. They were pretty much the same games, just with different stages. Sound familiar? But I don't remember anyone complaining about it. Why was it that we were able to play all three of these games and not get tired of them, yet a lot of us this generation can't stand a game like Call of Duty, which is guilty of committing the same crime? What was it about the older gaming generations compared to this generation where back then we actually accepted repetitiveness, but now we can't? My hatred for shooters now has nothing to do with my nostalgia for specific shooters before. But what real change happened this generation to give off this feeling of repetitiveness? If something new was introduced to gaming every generation, then why does this one feel so stale where despite the fact that games are still being made, people are already in a hurry for the next generation to get here? My answer? One word. Graphics. When a new console came out, that was normally the first thing that got us all excited. However, for one to say that graphics were the only thing that changed for gaming every generation would sound rather foolish. There have been little changes here and there in gaming over the generations other than graphics. But, in most cases, graphics did play a part in how the developers were able to add those little changes. Things like Mode 7 used for Super Nintendo games such as Mario Kart and Star Fox were a graphical feature that allowed background layers to be scaled and rotated. This feature couldn't have happened had Nintendo not made another console that was capable of supporting such a feature. So it's safe to say that enhanced graphics for this particular generation played a major role in how gameplay was enhanced. But what happens when graphics get to the point where they can no longer change the way a game is played, but instead only change the way a game looks? My guess? Generation 7. I believe that graphics seem to be more important only when they were able to add more ways for a game to be played. However, now all graphics seem to have done this generation was simply take what we already played last gen and make it look better. What did change the way games were played this generation was a feature that we can all see is really being taken advantage of. Online play. It's true in the past that we always used the graphics argument for what made our favorite consoles better, and I think we didn't know just how right we were. Graphics were a main feature that not only got us excited for the newer consoles, but changed the way we gamed. Hell, even Nintendo, who this generation didn't take the graphic route, actually took the graphic route in the past. But why didn't they take the same route this time? I want to say that Nintendo knew graphics alone weren't going to hold the interest of all gamers this generation, and that might have been what gave them the idea to push motion controls instead of graphics. Problem is, if I say that, then I'd have to ignore their successful plan of bringing in the other audience. And this, guys, is where I think things could go south for us, because I think that the other audience could do the same thing to gaming that it did to the shows that we used to like that ended up changing to the point that we stopped liking them, and the same thing that we did to the shows that our parents or grandparents liked before we came along and screwed it all up for them. However, to me, this is just the beginning of the problem. How many of you were real excited for this generation until you actually got a chance to experience what it had to offer, and then that same excitement you had suddenly died out? If I asked you all, out of all gaming generations you've been a part of, which one do you consider the worst, how many of you would say this one? Yeah, the new gamers wouldn't understand, but that makes sense. Of course they wouldn't understand, because the generation they're gaming in now was made for them. The same way we couldn't understand why our parents and grandparents didn't like the same shows we liked. They were made for us, not them. And the same reason why we can't stand the shows today that the younger generation watches. For them, the reason why some of us believe that the older gaming generations were better is due to nostalgia. And when I say older, I'm not referring to the Atari or SNES days, I'm actually referring to just one generation ago. But to us old school gamers, we know exactly why the previous generations were more fun and why this one is a joke. Generation 7 seems to be made more for the Generation 7 gamers and not the Generation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in some cases even 6 gamers. Would it be a fair statement for me to say the reason why a lot of us are so excited for the next generation isn't so much because we can't wait to see what it has to offer, but because we're simply just sick of this one? Is that why when new games come out now, especially this year, hardly anyone ever talks about them? The Wiimote for Nintendo, the Move for Sony, and Kinect from Microsoft could be the new direction gaming takes, but we all know that new ideas aren't going to be liked by everyone. And what could grab the attention for some gamers can also push other gamers away. But what happens when we become the other gamers? What happens when what we consider the norm takes a backseat to what the newer generation considers the norm? What happens when the developers notice that our norm is no longer where the money is, but instead where the new norm is? I know I'm reaching a little with this, but what do you guys think people in the past would have said if they were told that the same type of people that made fun of them would end up playing games, and in some cases end up playing games even more than they did? What if we were told in the past that the gaming market would end up changing to the point that what we considered the norm would take a back seat to what the other type of gamer considered the norm, and the others were the people that we would have never expected to play games? Would we have believed them? Or laughed and said, not gonna happen? And yet, here we are now. Will we keep gaming? Or will we end up losing our interest in gaming due to too much change? Doesn't mean we'll stop gaming altogether, but it could mean that we only end up playing the older consoles while telling the newer generation how much better gaming was back in the days of the Wii, 360, PS3, and our favorite console of all, YouTube drama. One of the main problems I see with gaming is that the main innovation has been used so long that it's starting to die out. An innovation that was a lot easier to accept in the past, but not so much now. That innovation, of course, is graphics. Yeah, going from the 8-bit to the 16-bit era felt different. It felt like a huge leap as developers were starting to get better at gaming design, and the technology that supported it helped. Back then, graphics were all it took in most cases to grab our attention, but now things are different. We went from, oh wow, I gotta get that game, look at those graphics, to, oh cool, this game has better graphics. What else does it have? If graphics can no longer be the innovator, then where do we go next? Will next generation be the same as this generation but with better graphics? If it is, then I get the feeling those of you who see this generation as bad will probably see the next generation as even worse. If they can come up with new ideas, then it becomes a question of, will we accept those new ideas? With Nintendo being as successful as they were with the casual audience this gen, Sony and Microsoft could work harder on the casual audience to the point that they end up becoming the norm while we all take a back seat. A little far-fetched, I'll admit, but if this happens, how many of you would really want to keep gaming? Game developers aren't going to make what we all like, they're going to make what's considered popular, which is why we have so many shooters this generation. That tells me that at some point games are going to change so much that eventually we won't necessarily grow out of them, we'll just simply lose interest in the newer types of games being developed for the newer generations. This is why I won't ever remember PlayStation for games like Uncharted, Killzone, God of War, or Little Big Planet. I'll remember PlayStation for games like Ridge Racer, Doom, Battle Arena, Toshinden, Brave Fencer, Musashi, Tekken, Metal Gear Solid, and Final Fantasy Tactics. I think another problem with games this gen is that they're so easy to forget. Unlike past games, these games can't withstand the test of time. This is the first gaming generation I've seen where people talk more about a game when it's not out than they do when it is out. When the game that people talk about for months is released, then they begin talking about the next game. Think about how long it took for games in the past generations to be considered old or forgotten about. Hell, years after the game was released, it was still talked about, and even if the game got a sequel, the original game was still discussed. While now it seems like the only way an original continues to get talked about is if the majority of the fan base of said game liked the original more than the sequel, which is why more people will talk about Modern Warfare than they will World at War. Like I said before, change can be a good or bad thing, and while I want to get mad at the developers, I have to show a little sympathy for them. If they continue to make the same thing, then at some point their fan base will start to get bored of it. But if they do change it, then it's not guaranteed that their fan base will like the change. Call of Duty's managed to stay popular due to it not changing. But what happens when the Call of Duty fan base gets bored of the game? Activision will be in trouble. But if they change the game, then they can run the risk of changing what people liked about it in the first place. It's a lose-lose situation for the gamer and the developer. Everything's changed now, guys. It seems to have started out simple, but now everything's gotten complicated. Hell, even the word gamer was a lot easier to define back then than it is now. The reason why we have so many different definitions of the word gamer is because we have so many different types of people gaming. Before, when you thought of a gamer, you pretty much just thought of a nerd. And the same people nowadays that say I'm a hardcore gamer were the exact same type of people who in the past made fun of gamers for that exact same reason. So developers figured out a way to pretty much say, shut the hell up, you're no different than the nerds, we just have to change the style a little. But not everyone likes this new style, and this can be a problem. If developers only make games to please this audience, then that means they have to disappoint this audience. But if there's more money in this audience, I don't think they'll really care who they disappoint. Same with the older audience. Nintendo found a way to take the same audience that said, oh, I'll never understand you kids and your stupid video games, and make them say, hey, this shit's actually not half bad. The next generation Nintendo isn't going to be leaps and bounds over this generation's consoles, so Nintendo's going to repeat their actions. There's no guarantees that this will work a second time. All those of us that are Nintendo fans can do is hope. It's true that Nintendo was very innovative this generation, and Sony and Microsoft doing what they did proves it. However, as I said, just because something is innovative doesn't automatically mean it'll be liked by everyone. So it doesn't surprise me that while I personally like the Nintendo Wii, Nintendo pushed some of their fan base away. Think about how a lot of people didn't like the change Nintendo did with the new theme of motion and how these people maybe decided to get an Xbox 360 instead. Then think about how Microsoft is also trying to cater to the casual market with their own version of motion controls. This could end up pushing people that bought the 360 away because they didn't like motion controls anyway. If Microsoft isn't careful, they might end up running their hardcore fan base away to the next PlayStation since they'll still believe that the next Wii console is for the casual audience. But what if Sony then starts to cater more to the users of the PS Move due to the success of the Wiimote and Kinect? Where would they go then? It's quite obvious that when it comes to gaming, no matter how old we get, we'll never stop. But I think it is possible that we may end up losing interest in the newer generations of gaming if it changes so much that the main reason why we like to game is no longer there.